Welcome to the Holy Smokes Podcast, a show about faith, friendship, fine tobacco, and drink. I'm Steve Ryder, and I'm in my garage.
Which is awesome.
It's a beautiful day here in Colorado, mid-80s, nice light breeze.
Yeah.
And we got some thunderstorms about to move in, and I am with a longtime friend of mine.
Indeed.
Gary Schneeberger. Gary.
Steve.
Welcome to the Holy Smokes Podcast.
I am honored to be on. I've listened for a long time. I was actually, I remember when you started this. I remember when all this was birthed. So I'm happy to be one of the babies to come out of it.
Well, you are someone that I have wanted to have on for quite a while. In fact, it was in March of last year, 2020, I was going back to Wisconsin for the boys' basketball tournament, high school. One of my college roommates had the number 1 seed for Division 7, undefeated, and it was looking like they were gonna win state. And little something happened that canceled the tournament.
Yeah.
Called COVID, and I ended up having to fly back, and so I have not been back to Wisconsin, or at least down to the southeastern part of the state where you are.
Yep.
And so...
So I had to come to Colorado. I had to come to the man. I had to come here. And as long as basketball played a part in the story that you just told, we are recording this when?
The day after our Milwaukee Bucks won the freaking NBA title.
Fear the deer, baby.
Fear the deer. Bucks and six.
Bobby.
So, first question, what you smoking?
A long time, trusted friend of mine loaned me, well, not loaned me because he's not getting it back, gave me a Cohiba Cuban. So yes. I am smoking that. So thank you.
I wanted you to celebrate well.
Yes,
the big win last night.
This whole interview thing started with just me wanting to come over and say hi and smoke a celebratory cigar with you. So
I didn't even know you were in town until you texted me this afternoon. So
we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. We're having a celebratory cigar, and I'm getting on the Holy Smokes podcast.
All right. So you are a cheesehead, a fellow cheesehead.
Indeed.
Tell me about your growing up years.
Wow. I grew up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which, as you indicated, is southeastern, about as far south as you can get before you get into northern Illinois. Yep. So that's why, while you and I are simpatico on the Bucks and simpatico on the Packers, when it comes to baseball, I grew up because WGN broadcast Cub games. I was a diehard Cub fan. Still am a diehard Cub fan.
Truly sad.
I know.
Especially with those years of Harvey's Wallbangers and Robin Yount and Cecil Cooper.
I have to fall back on something Meatloaf said. 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? So I mean, sports were a big part of my childhood. Growing up in my neighborhood, I had great friends about my age we were all the sons of single moms. Either through death, through divorce, through whatever. There was like 4 or 5 of us who were sons of single moms who grew up playing baseball together, who grew up throwing footballs underneath the street lights, maybe sometimes, as long as the Kenosha police aren't listening, broke those street lights throwing rocks at them. And they were just, I described them as the buddies of my youth as the first people I loved who did not share my blood. And the beautiful part of that is that we have maintained our friendship through those years, through almost 40 years now.
Wow.
And that includes a period of time of 28 years after I moved away from Wisconsin, where you and I first met in Colorado. But even before Colorado, I was in Texas, I was in Nebraska, I was in a number of different places as a typical itinerant journalist. When I moved back home to Kenosha in 2016, all the guys still live there, and we still get together, and we still hang out, and we still talk, and we still smoke cigars together. And it's just as you've discovered, I think we've talked about this, or around the edges of this, the friends of your childhood. You meet people throughout your life, and they mean a lot to you, but there's something about those first friendships that you form in childhood that is everlasting and special.
That's awesome. Now, your home life at a very young age wasn't healthy.
Correct.
Talk about that.
again, to be in a neighborhood full of boys raised by single women, that means dad's not in the home. And my parents got divorced when I was 9. My father was not a perfect man. My father was very much, he had a bit of a temper issue, and he was not, he had some trouble reining that in. He took that out on my mom, on some of the kids. I'm the baby of the family, and there's 14 years between me and my oldest sibling, and 7 years between me and the one closest to me. So it was described to me this past weekend in talking to some family members that I sort of had a different childhood in some ways with my parents than my siblings did. My dad had kind of mellowed out, had kind of learned from his mistakes, had kind of acted in a different way. And we had a great relationship. He got remarried and was married before he passed away a couple months ago to my stepmom for almost 45 years. Yeah. And my mom also got remarried a couple years before she passed away in the 90s. And I always tell people, as hard as it was to grow up as a child of divorce, and that's a difficult thing, my parents were happier and better suited with the partners, the spouses they got married to after they split up. My mom's husband, my stepfather, Irv, was, my mom always loved to sing. He was a local celebrity organ player, like an electric organ, right? Not like the Doors. He was like, standards and that kind of stuff. And she got to sing with him. And that just brought her such joy. And my dad and my stepmom, like I said, my dad and my stepmother, I realized, I knew it all the time. It wasn't a surprise, but the numbers were a surprise to me. My dad was married to my stepmother twice as long as he was married to my mother. And he was happy. He found someone. So both of my parents found their perfect matches after each other and maintained a...
Civil?
Absolutely civil. They raised me together as their youngest child. I spent summers with my dad on vacations and saw him every Sunday. And it was not an easy upbringing, but I learned lessons from it. My parents learned lessons from it. And one of the things that has helped me get through it is that my dad was not shy about saying, I love you or I'm sorry. And that made me not shy about saying I love you, which has been everything in relationships and just emotionally for me. A lot of guys of his generation, he was 93 when he passed away in May. A lot of guys of his generation could, show love, throw a ball, punch you in the shoulder, but saying the words I love you weren't common for a lot of people. I've been to a lot of men's retreats. Folks who are listening to this, if you remember back about 20 years ago, men's retreats were all the rage in evangelical churches. You go away for a weekend, they take your watches away so you weren't looking at time. And I heard so many men say, I never knew my dad loved me. He never said he loved me. My dad never said he loved me. And I never had that problem because my dad always said he loved me.
That's cool.
And, yes, there were some things, then there were some behaviors that weren't always loving, but I'm guilty of that myself and some things that I've done, and just nobody's perfect. And he knew that, he admitted that, he sought forgiveness for that with my mother. I mean, the most powerful moment I ever witnessed between my parents, and I only saw them kiss once, by the way. I can only recall seeing them kiss once. The first time I got married, they were walking around in the hall or like outside, I got married outside, and somebody took a picture of them. We had those portable Polaroid cameras someone took a picture of them kissing. Like it was just like a peck on I was like, oh my gosh, my parent, I couldn't believe I saw that. But when my mom died, my dad came to the wake, and we were, all the kids, there were 5 of us, I'm the baby of 5. We were all there, and we were kind of milling about my mom's casket and crying and, speaking to her. And my dad was kind of awkwardly milling about, and finally when it cleaned out by her casket, I saw my dad on his knees leaning into her casket and whispering. And I never asked him what he said because it was none of my business. He was doing his final business with her. And that was another great example of, again, someone who was not afraid to say he was sorry. And that's made me, trust me. As you well know, I've had to say I'm sorry to you. So I mean, we learned,
each have. I mean, I have as well. To
exactly,
you.
Yeah. And I've learned to say it and receive it because of the way I was raised, and that's a good thing.
That's awesome. That's cool. So, high school, you started writing for your high school paper, right? Mm-hmm. What got you into that?
My mom got me into that. I was, it's funny, the Packers, my mom bought me an electric typewriter when I was about 11, 12, 13, something like that. And I remember I would watch Monday Night Football, which is the only time the Packers were ever on, like a national, right? Monday Night Football, oh my gosh, the Packers are on. And I remember watching the game, and I would type out the play-by-play on this computer. On this computer.
Typewriter.
On this electric typewriter. For those of you who are too young to have ever seen a typewriter, it is indeed what a computer does now. You did on a typewriter back in those days. And my mom bought me an electric typewriter, and that was, I was always an imaginative kid, I guess. And I would, in addition to keeping play-by-play meticulously on Packer games, I wrote scripts for my friends and I to act out. So at the time when I was that age, Starsky and Hutch was a TV show. It was a cop show. Cop shows were all the rage in the mid to late 70s. And Starsky and Hutch was the biggest one. And there was also one called Beretta that I was also a big fan of. So I, in grade school, decided I was going to form my own superhero cop duo with a buddy of mine. And just like Starsky and Hutch, we created BA, which stood for Beretta, that was me, and FUM, which stood for Billy Fumo, who was my friend. We were BA and FUM, and I wrote scripts. I still have them. I still have 2 of the scripts that my mom kept of us doing. And here's the funny part about that. We were reading them. When I moved back home to Wisconsin in 2016, I hooked up again with my friend Billy Fumo, who had not ever moved away. And we were reading through those scripts, and for some reason, when I was 12, the most savage weapon I could use as a super cop was a monkey wrench. Every episode I wrote had at least 2 episodes where the bad guys got whipped with what I don't even know what a monkey wrench is. It was apparently just big wrench that you would whip, but Buck could really wield a monkey wrench back in the late 1970s. So.
I don't know if you've heard the Ethan Nicole episode, Ethan Nicole with Babylon Bee. There was a big age difference between Ethan and his youngest brother and Malachi. And Malachi created this character called Axe Cop. That's all he carried around was this axe. And Ethan started, as an illustrator, as an artist,
right.
He started drawing these internet cartoons, and it went crazy about Axe Cop. And he basically took the stories that Malachi would create as Malachi was playing with these toys. He was 6 at the time. And Ethan would illustrate these stories out with the most ridiculous stuff happening. And anyway, a cartoon ended up coming out of that, Axe Cop.
Yeah, and that, there's something to be said about the fertile minds of children, right? I mean, you see it as a dad, I see it as a stepdad. It's embarrassing for me to read the misspellings in those old scripts, but there's some not bad action in there. And then we would mix up. We'd have crossover episodes before crossover episodes were cool.
Really?
Bud and Fum teamed up with Starsky and Hutch. And one time we teamed up with the guys from SWAT. SWAT was a TV show in the 70s, everybody, before it was a TV show now on CBS. So yeah, we did. We had all that kind of stuff. And we would act them out. My buddies and I would act them out in the neighborhood. And that was, part of the reason I talked, earlier about the friends of your youth. There's nothing like them, and that was some of the experiences that we shared. Were until the streetlights came on, we were playing Super Cop out in the field.
So you went to school.
Yep.
University of Wisconsin Parkside.
In my hometown of Kenosha. Yeah.
And you studied journalism there. No, you didn't.
No, they didn't have a journalism program. They had I was an English major, which I used to argue at the time. No one will know who this. If you're of a certain age, you'll know what this means. I said all an English degree really got me qualified to do was talk like Richard Dawson, who used to host Family Feud because he was British. But I got an English degree. But while I was in college, I got my first paid writing gig at age 17 for a local TV guide magazine in Kenosha called Happenings Magazine, run by a gentleman named Frank Carmichael, who was the first one to ever pay me. I still have a copy of the check. I made $20 for one TV review column. I was the TV critic. My first review was on the A-Team. That'll tell you how long ago that was. And he paid me, and that got me addicted to bylines. It got me addicted to telling stories in print. And that then, after happenings, after college, I hooked on with a daily newspaper in Racine, Wisconsin, which is just the one city up north from Kenosha, and that got me into a 2-decade newspaper career.
So you started there at Racine?
Yeah.
Then? That was your first job?
That was my first full-time newspaper job, daily newspaper job.
Where'd you go after that?
Let's see if I can get this order right.
Yeah.
I left Racine in 1989 and took a job with a sister paper in Davenport, Iowa, the Quad Cities in Iowa. Quad Cities, Iowa, and Illinois.
Yep.
Did that for a couple of years. That was a rewarding time because I was a features reporter, and I created this Hollywood interview column because I was so into Hollywood stuff. And as you can tell, I was writing TV scripts when I was 12, right? There's no TV, but they were all acted out. Stage plays, I guess. I would interview celebrities, and it became syndicated throughout the Lee Enterprises newspaper group. So when I was in my early 20s, I was writing this. It was called Hollywood Hotline. I still remember it. I took this terrible, I had a mullet, and I took this column signature, Steve. I took this column signature, and I wanted to look like I was smarter. So now I wear glasses because I'm 56 and I need them. But at the time I was in my early 20s, I bought clear fake glasses, and I wore them for my column sig photograph because I wanted to look smart. And I had one of those phones with a cord, one of those big like plug-in home phones, and I had it, and it was like Hollywood Hotline, and I'm on the phone, I'm on the horn talking to these Hollywood people. But I got some good interviews. I interviewed Charlton Heston, which was a huge one. I was talking to him, and I was calling him Mr. Heston, Mr. Heston, Mr. Heston. Right, the Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur, and just all of that. And this is the late '80s.
Soylent Green.
Yeah, I mean, he was
Planet
a legend. Planet of the Apes. He's a legend.
Yeah.
And I'm calling him Mr. Heston, Mr. Heston, Mr. Heston, and he says to me, "Oh, please call me Chuck." And I said back to him, I said, "I'm sorry, but the best I can do is Mr. Chuck." So I told Charlton Heston the best I could do was call him Mr. Chuck. But that was, that...
How did he respond to that?
He laughed. I also got him to say, and I'm not sure what the rating is on your podcast.
It's open.
Okay, so I can say this. So I'm working for the Racine Journal-Times, a daily newspaper in the relatively small town of Racine, Wisconsin. And I interviewed Charlton Heston because he was doing a TV show. He was doing a Dynasty, was a TV soap opera in the 80s, and he did a spinoff of Dynasty, and he was a star of that. And people were like, "Oh my gosh, Charlton Heston, all those roles that we just named, now he's doing television, how the mighty have fallen." And I asked him a question about that. And he said, "Oh, that's bullshit. Pure bullshit," Charlton Heston says. So I'm 22 years old. I go to my editors, and I'm arguing as a reporter, right? A kid reporter. I've got like 2 years under my belt. And I'm like, this should go, first of all, it should go on the front page because it's Charlton Heston, and the local paper got an interview with him. And second of all, the fact that a big celebrity like him said bullshit, we should put it in the paper. And my editor did it.
Wow.
I still can find that clip online through newspapers.com, Charlton Heston saying bullshit on the front page of the Racine Journal-Times in 1988. Years later in my journalism career, when I became an editor, reporters would come up and try to get me to, well, it was important that I'm like, you got to be kidding me, man. I sold that when I was in your shoes, but that's not going to fly with me. We're not going to put that. We're going to put... F ... or whatever we have to put. People will know what you mean. You don't have to spell it out. But for some reason, my editors let me get away with that. So that was one of my early journalism calling cards. Charlton Heston said bullshit to me in the Racine Journal-Times.
Quad Cities then turned into, let's see, I go from the Quad Cities to Victoria, Texas. That was my first go-round in Texas. I worked twice in Texas. Once in Victoria, which is the town slogan for Victoria on the sort of the Gulf side-ish, southern Texas, was the Crossroads of South Texas, which now that I'm in public relations, I'm like, that's a really bad nickname for a city because it means there's nothing good here. We're the crossroads of South Texas. If you want to get a road that goes this way and a road that happens to go this way, and we're right in the middle.
Right. If you want to get to a fun place like Houston or Corpus Christi, you have to go through us. But you don't want to stay here too long. And indeed, it was a city like that. But that was where I first became an editor. I got promoted to become an assistant city editor and then became an assistant managing editor. And that's when I really went to school and learned journalism.
How so?
I had a teacher who, the editor of that paper, the Victoria Advocate, was a man named Jim Bishop. And Jim Bishop had worked, actually, oh my gosh, in Colorado Springs, Colorado for the Gazette.
Really?
And the Gazette won a Pulitzer Prize. And yeah.
For
coverage of an explosion and it was a chemical explosion, and his name wasn't on it, but his fingerprints were. He was the editor who edited that project, and he was just a fabulous storyteller and a fabulous journalist.
You've talked about him a bunch on Facebook.
Yeah,
his influence on your life.
He was my mentor.
Yeah,
he was my journalism mentor. I learned so much on how to both be a shaper of words, an arranger of words from him, but also how to be a boss, how to lead people, because he was very good at that as well.
Really?
So that was where I got into management, where I got into editing, and that's when my journalism career really became a career. It wasn't just a job. I always loved to write, and it was fun, and it was a kick to get Charlton Heston to swear. But to be able to do important stories, important journalism, that there's an old movie that no one's ever seen and no one's ever liked called starred Jamie Lee Curtis and John Travolta. They were reporters for Rolling Stone, and John Travolta was this hotshot reporter from Rolling Stone, and he would say about interviewing people that the purpose of a reporter's job was to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. And that's what I picked up, and that's what I applied as an editor after working under Jim Bishop's tutelage. And we did some really good journalism that I'm still proud of to this day. We did I moved on after Victoria. I had a cup of coffee in Scottsbluff, Nebraska as editor of my own paper before I was 30. That didn't work out, but then I ended up again in Texas, in a smaller town up north, which, while it didn't have a bad slogan, it was when they made a Texas version of Monopoly. Wichita Falls was the first purple cheap property around Go. That'll tell you all you need to know about Wichita Falls. But we did a series.
Where in Texas is Wichita Falls?
North. So it's north of Dallas. And we did a series of stories when I was the managing editor of that paper that examined the paper's, all the talk right now of institutional racism, and this was in the early 90s, mid 90s. We did a story on the paper's way that the city of Wichita Falls and the paper itself treated African Americans to the point that they wouldn't, when Max Schmeling, German Caucasian boxer, was knocked out by Joe Louis, who was African American, U.S. boxer, in the Times Record News of Wichita Falls, we went back in the archives. The photo was of Max Schmeling on the ground, on the canvas. You couldn't show a black boxer in the 1940s in Wichita Falls, Texas. They had horrific headlines that would say, "Man, N-word killed in shooting," and we told the paper's dirty laundry. We told the city's dirty laundry of what racism was like in that community, and that was in the mid 90s. Wow. One of the most powerful and important things I was ever involved in as a journalist.
Where did the idea for that germinate?
Another great editor I worked for, a man named Carol Wilson. Carol Wilson was the editor of the Times Record News, and Carol was one of those afflict the comfortable guys. He was
interesting.
He's and he wanted to shine a light on what was wrong with society. Right, and that was. I mean, there's a lot of talk we can have today about what journalism has become, and I'll be the first to talk about it. And
we will get to it.
Right. The way that he ran that newspaper was to tell stories that challenged the community. We weren't there to pat the community on the head and say, "You got everything right." We were there, spotlight people doing things right, absolutely. But when people were doing things wrong, we reported on that. That's what journalism's about. That's what, Woodward and Bernstein were about when they were Woodward and Bernstein, before Woodward ended up becoming what he's become today. There was something about exposing things that needed to be exposed, bringing things to light that needed to be brought to light, not to be sensational, but to be factual. That was, those were halcyon days, truly. It was a great time. The late 80s and the early to mid 90s were a great time.
To be a journalist?
Yeah, because it was post-Watergate, so there was a lot of, in many ways, sort of the golden age of investigative journalism, even in small towns, like Wichita Falls, which wrote an 8-part series. It was called, I still remember what it was called, Wichita Falls in Black and White, it was called.
Ooh.
Yeah, and it was...
How was it received?
As you would expect, which made Carol Wilson, the editor, thrilled to no end. Because again, he was afflicting the comfortable. The folks who had lived by this system in which one group of people had kept another group of people down to the point of not even being able to acknowledge them in the newspaper, he was happy with that because it opened eyes. It opened people's eyes up to what the truth was. And I still believe, he believed, I believe to this day, it changed things. It changed perspectives. We had a reporter who worked on that series. He was a young reporter. And I still remember his name was, I don't know if he smokes cigars. I have no idea if he's a Christian and he likes to enjoy a drink. He did then, as did I. We'll get to that too, I'm
yes,
sure.
we will be getting to that.
But Cody Aycock was his name. And I remember Cody was so moved. He was a young kid from Arizona, came into Wichita Falls, really didn't kind of know. He was not naive, but sort of inexperienced to the world. And he was moved by the things that he found as he was investigating how African Americans were regarded in North Texas, in the South. People's eyes were opened, and I think lives were changed, and that is important. That's a legacy, worth having, I think, and that that I left that behind, and some other things that I did as a journalist. When I left journalism, I left that behind. I sleep well at night knowing that.
Before we get into your transition out of journalism, talk about from an insider's view, someone who came up during that golden age of investigative journalism. What do you think the state of journalism is today?
Imperiled. First of all, pure journalism is far less easy to come by. Meaning opinion rules the day, right? Drives me nuts to this day when people will say, Sean Hannity is so biased, or Rachel Maddow is so biased. No, they're not biased. They get paid to have an opinion. That's their job, right? Like the editorial page of newspapers. They get paid to have an opinion. The news pages shouldn't have an opinion, and the news anchors shouldn't have an opinion, and unfortunately, many times they do. Are there still good ones out there? Yes. Are they?
Who do you think are the good ones?
Truly at the national level, it's hard to find because even if you report a story at the national level in a factual base, it will get the anchors or some of the talkers like a Sean Hannity or Rachel Maddow will take it, use it,
twist it, cherry pick,
because we've gone from the idea that they had in the movie with Travolta and Jamie Lee Curtis to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. We've gone on now to gotcha and to sensationalize. When I was in newspapers, if anybody who's listening has access to find a newspaper, if there's still one in your city, look at it. There's a headline over a story, there's a name probably on it, a byline, and if there's a photo with it. There should be a caption on the photo. When I was in newspapers, we looked at the reader as someone who was busy, and if they were only a skimmer, they couldn't read the whole story, we wanted to give them that story if they could skim. So the headline was packed with information. The subheadline was packed with information. The cut line, the caption on the photo, was packed with different information. Because you could skim, you could find those 3 points, and you could get an idea of what the story was about if you didn't have enough time. It's the exact opposite today. Today, you go online and they'll tell you, you won't believe how fat this star from 1987 got today. And you'll have to click through 57 things to see how fat he or she got. It's about making you click by not telling you anything.
Clickbait.
Right, by hooking your interest but not giving you information. And so much of what we're given today in the media is rooted in that today. So it's a totally different, a totally foreign practice to me. I mean, I still get a newspaper, right? I'm old school. I like to hold it in my hand. And I still get it, and I'm flabbergasted at some of the things that pass for stories that aren't really stories, that aren't told well. There was a way of writing a story. I was just talking to my uncle about it, who was an advertising manager for the hometown newspaper for years. And the style was, look it up on Wikipedia, it's called the inverted pyramid. You'd write the story so that all the most pertinent information was in the top. And then as you got down and down, you added details that sort of added accent to it, added flavor to it. But you could hack off the bottom of that story.
And still get enough of an idea.
Correct. You may not get the sprinkles on top of your sundae and maybe the caramel sauce, but you got the ice cream. And you got a couple of cherries maybe. You could cut it off because you had to cut the story to fit it in the paper. Nowadays, they don't do that. Nowadays, they just sort of throw it all like a Jackson Pollock painting against like paint on the wall and see what sticks, and they just go with it from that. So I think there are fewer trained journalists working today, and
is that a problem when you say trained journalists? Is that a problem of the universities?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's a problem of the universities in that they're not that universities' journalism are gender-driven, not gender-driven, are agenda-driven in the same way that journalism itself is agenda-driven now, more so than because remember when I say afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, I don't mean just so you can step on someone's neck. I mean so that you can elucidate truth, right? And so much of the gotcha stuff isn't about elucidating truth; it's about getting someone. And you would afflict the comfortable to bring truth to light, right? Woodward and Bernstein again. I won't defend Bob Woodward's books today, but I'll defend his work at Watergate because he exposed something that needed to be exposed. There was a cancer in the White House, and he exposed it. And that was a good thing for the country. Look at what's been going on now. I don't think you get that same kind of payoff in some of the journalism, quote unquote, that's getting done today.
You hinted at it a second ago. You went through a real crisis there in Wichita Falls that had really been building for years and years.
Yeah.
You're drinking.
Yeah. That's one of the, I say it's funny now. I say that I had two of the three vices of journalism. There are three main vices of journalism, or there were when I was coming up. Coffee.
Cigarettes,
and booze. I don't drink coffee. Never have. So I never got coffee. Had cigarettes, had booze. Kicked both, and the cigarettes were harder than the booze. But
when did you kick the cigarettes?
I didn't kick the cigarettes till I came to work at Focus on the Family.
Really?
Yeah. I was already a Christian. I got saved, got sober, got saved in '97, and then I still smoked for like 2 years after that. 2 years after that, until God got my attention by starting my pocket on fire. My pocket started on fire in a newsroom in Palm Springs, California. I had a lighter in there. I had cigarettes in the other pocket, and the lighter just lit. And
oh my gosh.
I threw the pack of cigarettes away, and that was the end of my smoking cigarettes.
But talk about your problem, because on Facebook and in person, you're really open and vulnerable about your years of alcoholism and what it did to you as a person and how it destroyed relationships.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it was, as journalism goes on, as I get more responsibility in newsrooms, as I get a bigger paycheck in newsrooms, those sessions of let's go out and have a couple of drinks to celebrate a victory become let's go out and have 24 drinks to start celebrating a victory, and then just continue to drink, to what I learned when I was in treatment in Alcoholics Anonymous to change the way I felt. At its root, we talked earlier about some things that I grew up with that weren't ideal circumstances. I never processed those things very well. So I didn't like having to camp out on them, so I wanted to forget them the any way that I could. And a relatively cheap and easy way to do that was to drink. Unfortunately, there were people who got caught up in that just in terms of my behavior. I was an unfaithful husband. I was a not very reliable friend. For whatever reason, I could still work pretty hard and still do pretty well. I was a high-functioning alcoholic, but I was an emotional wreck. You know, the nights you'd laugh, you'd be at the bar, it'd all be fun, but you'd go home and you'd lie in, I remember many times lying in bed, and I was like, is this all there is in life? Right? This is all there is? You go out, you have fun when you're with people, but you can't stand being alone, and you don't know what to do. And there were, I never did try to hurt myself, but I thought about it a lot. And there was a night when the drinking, you know, I was at a journalism convention in South Padre Island, Texas, working for the paper in Wichita Falls, as you said. My buddy Jim Bishop, my mentor, was there because his paper was there. And my paper, that I was managing editor of in Wichita Falls, won a whole bunch of awards, some for that very series I was talking about Wichita Falls in black and white. And what should have been the greatest night of my journalism career just was this terrible night of debauchery that led to, and this is, if anybody's listening who knows anything at all about Texas newspaper history, the Texas Associated Press Managing Editors Conference every year, the managing editor of the Dallas Morning News ran a poker game out of the hospitality suite at the hotel every year for 25, 30 years. I showed up there. I thought their booze was too cheap, so I brought my own bottle of whiskey. Smoking like a chimney, swearing like a sailor, causing all kinds of trouble. I actually was hitting on a woman there whose husband was also at the table. It got so bad that the managing editor of the Dallas Morning News, who had held court at this poker table for a quarter of a century, picked up his cards and left. I drove him away.
Wow. Did you recognize it at the time?
I went back to my hotel room, and that was when, as I say, I never hurt myself, thought about it a bit, various times. I remember going back to my hotel very clearly, and I was like, I used to always call people when I was like that. I think I'm going to hurt myself. And that was just to get sympathy. But I was lying in my bed alone, and I had that thought, and I didn't want to call anybody. And I got to sleep, and the next day was the last drink I had. I flew back from South Padre Island to Wichita Falls, quit my job when I got back, and went into rehab. Because I knew what scared me was I didn't reach out to say, hey, somebody rescue me. I was like, and I didn't know what life would be like after that. And I knew I'd burned, I flamed out in front of everybody who was anybody in Texas journalism. I drove away a Texas journalism legend from his poker table. I knew I was, I was going to get in trouble, and I did. Instead of getting fired, I quit and went into rehab. And the last drink I had was at the hotel bar in South Padre Island before we flew back to Wichita Falls.
Had you ever thought about going into rehab before that? Had friends confronted you?
Yeah, I never had an intervention per se, but I remember somebody, people had suggested that I should do that it was getting out of control, that I wasn't, fun anymore. I wasn't the jovial drunk who didn't stick around as long as he used to. I went to a therapist, but I wouldn't go to an AA meeting. I was like, I was going to kick it myself. That lasted for about 2 months of white knuckling it. And that's when I finally went into rehab. That's when I learned what makes you an alcoholic isn't how much you drink. It's why you drink. And I drank to change the way I felt. So even if you only have one drink and you're drinking for a purpose, like that, to change the way you feel, to get through the day, to whatever, you have a problem. And that helped me focus on that situation. And that was the first time, and I'll talk about, I'm not still in AA, I don't refer to myself as a recovering alcoholic, even though I've been sober 24 years, be 25 in April. I believe God healed me of my alcoholism. That's
huge.
That said,
Yeah.
I don't believe I would have found Jesus were it not for AA. And I am the greatest supporter of AA that you could find, because it was my first encounter with the idea that there was a power higher than me.
Did you go to rehab and then AA after you got out of rehab?
One of the things that the rehab center I was in did, as part of the treatment, was to go to AA meetings once a day. So we all went as a group to the AA meetings. And that was the first time that someone got up and talked about the AA language as a God of our own understanding. And that was the first time I started thinking about those kinds of, questions of what that might, mean. That I wasn't the be-all, end-all. That there was something maybe bigger than me. I've said this 100 times if I've said it once. If in that first meeting someone would have said Jesus to me, I would have said see ya, because I wasn't ready. I was ready to get sober, but I wasn't ready to get religion. That would wait until I was unemployed, going to AA, got a job in Palm Springs, California, and then that's when I got saved, a few months after getting sober.
You weren't ready for Jesus.
Correct.
Why? Did you grow up at all?
Mm-mm.
Parents
didn't go to church. I would.
What was your experience with faith, religion, Jesus, etc.?
None. I mean, I could not. When I got saved, I could not have articulated for you before that moment the difference between God and Jesus, like father son. I couldn't have even articulated that much. I thought.
Did you have bad experiences?
No, we just didn't. It was interesting because we grew up. Our house was kitty corner to the ministers. It was a pastorate house for the ministers of a Methodist church in town. We never went. Kenosha's a largely heavily Catholic community, so I went to church periodically to mass with some girlfriends to kind of make them happy on holidays. But I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't really listen to what was going on, and I didn't have a bad experience. I just had no experience. I had no frame of reference. So the reason I say, if someone would have said Jesus, I would have been like, that would have been, you've been doing a lot of hiking. So that would have been like a 14-footer or, miler or whatever it is.
14er.
14er. That would have been a 14er.
For those that don't know, they're the mountains in Colorado that are above 14,000 feet.
Right. That would have been a 14er. I was only ready for a 7er at that time. And that was, okay, stop drinking. It's because you're an alcoholic because of why you drink. Get control of that. Get your emotions right. Make amends to people. Do those things I said my dad was good at doing. Apologize. Recognize that there's something going on here, that it's not all about you. And I did that for a while, but then had a crisis moment in Palm Springs where I have no idea, Steve. I have no idea. If you're not terribly charismatic and you're listening, you may want to press pause, because I had met a girl, young woman, in Palm Springs. I wasn't going to tell anybody about my alcoholic history. I was going to start fresh. Mm-hmm. I met this girl this young woman I was interested in, and wanted to go out with her. She didn't want to go out with me. She kept trying to talk to me about God and Jesus, and I'm like, no, I just want to date you. She didn't want to date me. So finally she said, nope, I don't want to date you. You're nice and all that, but what you really need is Jesus. We're done, even hanging out. And that's when I went out. I used to drink Crown Royal whiskey, but I was such a lightweight. I hated the taste of it, so I only drank to get drunk, not because I liked it. So I would always cut it with Coke. So I'd buy top shelf whiskey, I'd cut it with Coke. And for some reason, this was a dumb move in retrospect. I kept my favorite glass that I would mix drinks in for some reason, even though I was sober for like 4 or 5 months when I moved to Palm Springs. I kept it. So I still had it. So I decided, you know what? This sobriety's not going to work. I got rejected by this girl. I'm going to get drunk. So I went out and I bought bottle of Crown Royal whiskey. And I bought some RC Cola because I thought it was cute to call it Crown and Crown when I mixed it. I bought a bag of ice because I was still too incapable of actually making ice in my freezer. Because I was not living the most stable life, right? Bought the bag of ice, got home, pulled the glass out, put the ice in the glass, poured the whiskey over the ice, put the Coke to fill it up, stuck my finger in it to stir it like I always did. Stirred it up. Went to put my finger in my mouth like I had done probably 103,247 times in my life. And I could not put my finger in my mouth. I was physically unable to lick that mixture of whiskey and Royal Crown Cola off of my finger. And I sat down, freaked out. And then I said, okay, I'll just pick up the glass. I went to pick up the glass. My hand could not touch the glass. As it turns out, the young woman with whom I was enamored, who told me, you don't need me, you need Jesus, had given me the name of someone from her church.
Yeah.
Had his phone number in my wallet, pocket, in some pile of clothes somewhere. I picked it up and called him. His name is Marcus Osborne. Called Marcus up. He answered the phone, and I told him what happened. And he said, do you want to come over? Never forget it. I said, no. I think that's why I probably should. I went over to Marcus's house, and he led me to the Lord.
Wow.
And every day since then has been perfect. Not. But yeah, he led me to the Lord, and I went to church, sat outside smoking cigarettes, like watching people go in, right? I went to the church that this young woman went to, that Marcus went to, hanging out behind a garbage dumpster, chain smoking cigarettes, and should I go in, should I not go in? I went in, and I broke like a dry twig during worship. And
what was it?
It was just this, I felt the presence of God. It was feeling the presence, this comforting presence that it was the presence of God saying, you're okay. I love you. It's going to be okay. It's all right. There's a way forward. You don't have to try so hard. It's all going to be okay. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be okay. And in that moment, just hearing these people so enthusiastically worshiping God. And it's funny, the reason I brought up the charismatic thing is not only because I couldn't touch the glass, which could hit your theology in some way or not, but the church was extremely charismatic to the point that it's funny, like people would bray like donkeys in this church. It was great. So I got saved in a church where they brayed like donkeys. So nothing, anything that came after that was like normal to me. And, I settled in my Christian walk into places where, yes, I do believe that God speaks to us. I do believe all those things, but I'm not, that much into the prophetic. But that's what happened, is I felt the presence of God, and that was everything. And that changed everything. And I went home from church that Sunday, picked up the glass suddenly, poured it out, poured the whiskey down the drain, and that was November 2nd of 1997, which interestingly, that's my rebirth day, right? The day I became a Christian. I count that as the day I became a Christian, even though I prayed the sinner's prayer a few days before that. Is November 2nd, 11/2. My birthday is 2/11. Isn't God great? So yeah, that was and that was the start of learning to walk it out. And I'll remember. So that was 97. I went to work at Focus. I got hired at Focus in 2000. And you'll remember from your days at Focus, the monthly chapel services. And I remember the Christmas chapel. I started in September, so the Christmas chapel was only like 3 months after that. And in the Christmas chapel, Dr. Dobson was still running Focus. And he was praying for everybody. And I just started crying, because I had come from where I had been, and now I was getting paid to sit in a room with this. Even I had heard of this man of God who was praying for me, us, And it was just such a totally different life than me lying in bed going, is this all there is? Now I knew there was a lot more to it than that. That wasn't all there was. And that changed everything. So I like to tell people, in sort of prefacing that story sometimes, I'll say, you know, I got saved in a secular newspaper newsroom in Palm Springs, California, at age 32. That's not exactly Saul's conversion to Paul, but it's pretty close. Because Palm Springs is not a Christian place, generally speaking. Obviously, there are Christians there. My church was in that area, but Palm Springs is kind of a liberal bastion. 32, not a lot of people getting saved. You know, as the statistics show, the older you get, the harder that is. And newspapers are, you know, the only time I ever heard God in the newsroom I worked in was as the second part of, or the first part of everybody's second favorite swear word. That was the only time I ever heard God, and it was like, okay. And I've stumbled and fallen and tried to stumble forward, but I've never looked back, and that's been everything. And I have lived sober and saved now longer, at least consciously, than I did otherwise. And that, I mean, I remember when I was working at Focus, to bring both halves of the stories together, my hometown paper did a feature for me, on me, in the religion paper, because I was Dr. Dobson's chief PR guy. Okay?
Yep.
Picture of me on the cover of the religion section, story about me, all about what we've talked about here. And a buddy of mine who I had fallen out of touch with said he saw the paper and he said to himself, Schneeberger finally burned down a church. That's what he thought when he saw my photograph on the cover of the religion page. And that was when I called him up and said, oh, some things are different now. You know, I'm not the same guy that I was. So, yeah, that's the, and I say it jokingly, the Saul Paul thing, but for people who knew me then and know me now, and didn't know me in between, they thought I burnt down a church. A guy that I hung around with, that I partied with, thought that I had finally burned down a church. That's not exactly, I mean, it's not certainly as serious as what Saul did, but kind of falls in the same ballpark, doesn't it?
So you left Focus in, what, 2011? 2012?
2011. I left the day that Jim Daly, president of Focus's book, it was his manifesto on public policy called Refocus, came out. And the reason I did that was because I felt like God, I started at Focus working for Citizen Magazine. I ended up, over the course of the 12 years I was there, becoming the vice president of communications. And I was the chief spokesperson for the organization. And one of the main things that we had to do, that I had to do, was when Dr. Dobson left Focus and Jim took over Focus, nobody knew who the heck Jim Daly was, and James Dobson was a household name. I had to get Jim on the map. Focus was already on the map, but their new leadership needed to be on the map. So we organized, we focused, no pun intended, on getting Jim's name out there, creating opportunities for him, which included a cover story in Christianity Today. We did things to show that while, as I put it then, Jim was not the same, he's a different generation than Dr. Dobson. Dr. Dobson was a PhD. Jim was a guy who was just raising his family like everybody else that he's talking to, but he still brought godly wisdom just from a different perspective. And when that book came out, it felt to me like that was my mandate having been completed. Jim had written his book. It had come out about the way he thought we should engage public policy, coming out of Dr. Dobson's large and justifiably large shadow. It was time to go back to being a marriage and parenting ministry. And while I was married at the time, I did not have any children. And I was like, okay, I don't have any firsthand experience in what this organization now is really going to have to focus on, doubling down on in the press. So I said, Dr. Dobson used to talk about it all the time. He always wanted to get to well done, good and faithful servant territory. And I felt like that's where God had brought me, that I had been faithful with what I could do. And it was time for somebody else to step into that position that I had as head of communications, who had a family, who had kids, who knew what that was about, who knew what that was like, who could speak authoritatively about that. So I ran away to Hollywood and marketed faith-based movies. I didn't run away. I took a job in Hollywood to market faith-based films.
You've talked about a number of times that within the journalism industry, PR people are looked down upon.
Absolutely. I did it myself when I was there.
Why did you make that move? First off, where does that come from? And why did you make that move?
It happened while I was at Focus, and at Citizen Magazine I was a writer. So I wrote stories for Citizen Magazine, public policy publication for Focus, no longer active. But while I was there doing that, it became, as a Christian, I wanted to help Christians, or to help journalists understand Christianity, to help journalists understand why Focus on the Family was doing what it was doing. To help them understand not only the positions that Focus on the Family took on policy issues, but also the fact that 97% of blood, sweat, toil, tears, money, donations, air was spent not on public policy, even though that got all the attention. That was part of my mandate, was to flip the script. Focus was known so much because of Dr. Dobson's passion and effectiveness in public policy as a public policy place, when in fact 97% of what we did was about marriage and parenting and family and standing boldly for Christ. And so I saw that opportunity to educate journalists about what Focus was really about, knowing from my own perspective that I didn't have the greatest view of Christians. I didn't know anything about them. I was in newsrooms. I know what they talked about. And no, I don't think, never once in my journalism career did we sit around and go, psst, let's have a We Hate Christians meeting. Journalists just don't know a lot about that stuff, by and large, the overwhelming majority. Going into public relations with Focus on the Family gave me the opportunity to educate journalists about what Christianity was about, what Focus on the Family specifically was doing in the culture. And because I had been one of them, I had been a secular journalist before I knew what a secular journalist was, I knew I could speak their language. And that would make me, I thought, effective at doing it. And as it turned out, it did make me pretty effective at doing it.
You developed some really good relationships during those years. I remember you telling me about some of the relationships that you developed with journalists.
When I left Focus to go work for Hollywood, I sent an email off to a lot of those contacts. One of them was Sean Hannity, who Dr. Dobson always went on Sean's show. And, Sean said very complimentary, kind things about the way that the guests I brought to him, the work that Focus had done. There was another guy named Dan Gilgoff. Dan Gilgoff wrote a book. I forget the title of it now, but it was on the quote unquote Christian right and its power and its influence. And it wasn't an unfair book. It was just what a secular guy would write about that. But I got the kindest, most heartfelt email from Dan Gilgoff, not a Christian, who had some run-ins with Dr. Dobson, who I had committed my largest faux pas as a PR person at Focus on a story that Dan did. And Dan, was what Dan saw, what I saw, and what Dan Gilgoff wrote me is that he saw a Christian who wasn't hypocritical. He saw me as someone who, when I made a mistake, I said, yep, I made a mistake. And he said that I did, after years of sort of animosity between Focus and the press, I had ushered in a new era for the organization with the press.
Ooh.
From a guy who was writing for U.S. News and World Report. And that meant a lot to me, even more than what Sean said, because Sean, conservative, agreed with what Focus did on policy positions more certainly than Dan Gilgoff did. That meant everything to me, that he saw in me what I hoped I was as a Christian, and that was someone who certainly wasn't perfect, but could, as I talked about my dad earlier, could acknowledge when I wasn't perfect and was committed to doing something better the next time around. So,
You left Hollywood, Southern California, and you moved back home. What was the impetus behind that?
Life, your listeners know this, life isn't perfect. People who live life, humans aren't perfect and Christian humans aren't perfect. And that young woman, I never squared the circle on the story of the young woman who introduced me to Christ in Palm Springs. We got married. We got married, and she was married to me all during my focus on the family tenure, and we moved out to Hollywood together. But we, had, I'm not going to, tell tales out of school here, but we had struggles that married couples have. And it got to the point that the marriage was not salvageable despite attempts to do so. Good faith attempts on both parts. So before I explain what brought me back home, I'll say this about my former wife. We remain friendly.
You've introduced me to her for a potential project.
Absolutely. We're friendly, and we have a theme going here. We have exchanged forgivenesses for the way that we did not treat each other in the best, as our vows indicated that we would treat each other. We did not do that as well as we should have. We tried, and it did not work. Ultimately, after 17 years, we split. About the time that was unraveling, that our marriage was becoming untenable, I reconnected with someone I knew from my hometown in college. Now, it's important to say that this person was not someone I dated in college. This was my pre-Christian days, and I dated a few people in college, but this woman was not one of them. And I have had a habit, as you well know, because you called me out on it this morning, because I was all excited about the Bucks winning, and you called me out on it. I've seen you on Facebook ripping on the coach, and every time I see it, you're right. I can tend to be a bit of a sharer on Facebook, and I can share from the solar plexus, not even from the heart. I'm just from the gut, right? But over the years, Facebook had been a great way for me to reconnect with people I had known throughout my life. And a lot of times, it gave me that opportunity to apologize for the way that I had treated people poorly before Christ. And I developed friendships out of that, and it was beautiful. So periodically, when I reconnected with dozens of people through the years. And it would be like I'd be bored on a Saturday or something, and I wonder whatever happened to Ed Smith, who I worked with in Victoria, Texas. So let's see if Ed Smith's on Facebook. Sure enough, he was, and we got, hey Ed, how you doing? Well, yeah, I'm a Christian, whatever. I looked up this young woman who was the first person I ever mentored. I ever tried to mentor in my life. You hear me talk earlier here about the importance of Jim Bishop mentoring me. And I tried to mentor someone when I was editor of my college paper at Parkside in Kenosha. We recruited the next season's journalist for the student paper from high schools in the area. So I recruited this young woman along with another 3 or 4 people to come write for the paper. And she was good. She was so good that I promoted her to be an editor after 3 months. Her name was Kelly McKissick. And so much, even though I was only 3 years of journalism experience ahead of her, and they were all collegiate or Happenings magazine writing TV reviews, for some reason I thought I had something to offer as a mentor, as a writer, and she learned a little bit from me, and she got better. And when I graduated, even in my unsaved, not always, in fact, very often thinking only of myself, I had poured into her as a journalist. I wanted to encourage her. So one thing that you probably know about me that nobody else, I'm a pen snob. Right? This is a Mont Blanc right here. On it I've written mightier, because the pen's mightier than the sword. And I have like 15 sort of higher end kind of pens. And that started in college before I had the money to buy higher end pens. So I had this cross pen that I carried around. And when I graduated, I gave the pen to Kelly. Again, we were just friends. I was just her mentor, but she learned a lot and she was good, and I loved journalism, and I was going to embark on a journalism career, and she was good, and she was going to be the future of journalism, and I was thrilled about that. So I gave her my pen on the day that I graduated. Tried to encourage her. We hugged goodbye. I graduated. She stayed on. 30 years, didn't really even think about her.
Yeah.
On a Saturday in 2016, I was like, I wonder when my marriage was falling apart, I wonder what Kelly McKissick's up to. Searched on Facebook, found her, sent her a message. I still remember what it says. Could it be Parkside's one-time ace journalist Kelly McKissick? No fair. You haven't aged since the Ranger days. Hope you're well. It was in Messenger on Facebook, before it was Messenger. Within 13 minutes, she responded and said, oh my gosh, Gary, oh my gosh, how you doing? Yeah. She was in PR. She had gone on and she had continued. She worked in journalism for a while and she got into PR too. And over the course of just a couple of weeks, we discovered that we had a friendship, and we discovered that there was something more than that there. And so I moved back home because she never moved away from home. I moved back home in 2016, in the late spring, early summer of 2016, to marry her, which I did in 2017. And
she's awesome.
And she is, Kelly is, all those things. You know, the thing I didn't say about when I left Focus because I didn't have kids, and I didn't think I was qualified to talk about that now that the Focus was off policy so much, and we were telling reporters now more focused than ever, we're a marriage and parenting organization. I didn't have kids. I wasn't a parent, so I didn't think I could, I should be doing that. But there was a hole in my heart because I always wanted kids. Always wanted them. And my former wife never wanted to have kids. And okay, that, what was I, what do you do? You don't want kids, I'm going to get divorced. No. We stayed together, we tried to make it work. That never happened. But Kelly was going through a divorce at the time herself. Not a Christian. Surprised to hear I was, but intrigued. And she had 2 kids. 2 teenagers. And lo and behold, that desire of my heart that God had planted, I believe, has gotten fulfilled. And I have repented for those things that my former wife and I had to talk to each other about and confess and apologize for. I've worked with my pastor, and God and I have done business on those things, and as far as the east is from the west. And the beautiful thing, Kelly and I were going to get married in the spring of 2017 at the university where we met. We were going to get married in a sort of a secular ceremony. But Kelly had been coming to church with me since I'd moved back home. She started asking questions when I was still in Hollywood about it, before I moved back home. And I could tell. I don't know how you tell these things, but I could tell. You've probably been in this situation before yourself with some people. You can just tell. You can see God's handprint on them. I could tell God's fingerprints were on her and that she was interested, and she would. And 3 months before we were supposed to get married in the secular ceremony, she had come to church with me, was so moved by the invitation at the end of church to accept Christ. She walked down there. I never pressured her once. I asked her all her questions, but I never said anything. I knew I wasn't going to be unequally yoked because I just knew God. I knew. She got saved. We postponed our wedding. We got married in our church before God. He's blessed that union and blessed the desire of my heart. I'm now a stepfather to 2 incredible kids. Incredible kids. And here's how, it's fun. And you know this. Here's how dumb I was despite working at Focus on the Family. I'm like, teenagers? That's going to be easy. Because I remember being a teenager. I don't remember being 5. I wouldn't know how to, step parent a 5-year-old. Teenagers can be easy. Teenagers, as you know, aren't easy. But incredibly rewarding. And it has brought my life full circle. Now I find it so funny. And this is the way God works. All those years at Focus, 12 years where I didn't have kids. And I, was hearing all this marriage and parenting advice on the radio program, and then Dr. Dobson talking and Jim talking, and the people who led those ministries, and just being around it by osmosis.
Same. Totally. Without question.
Now, step parenting, I remember those things. It's like that was the training ground. I didn't realize that God had me in a training ground. Mm-hmm. And it's been beautiful. The things that I've learned that I'm able to share with Kelly as we go through those kinds of things. So yeah, it's been, some people have asked, well, my gosh, you reconnected in February of 2016, you moved back home just a few months later, and then you got married. And one thing that Hollywood taught me, Steve, all movies, right, in promoting films in Hollywood for 3 years, all movies have 3 acts, right? And all the best action happens in the 3rd act. First act sets it up, second act, there's conflict. In the 3rd act, the conflict is resolved, there's a crisis, the hero comes back, the conflict is resolved, there's a happy ending. And I was 51 years old in 2016. I'm not very good at math, I'm a word guy, but I know enough to do simple division, and average life expectancies and all. At 51, that was about the start of my 3rd act. And I saw this was my chance to seize the happiness that my heart always wanted and never had, and I wasn't going to, wait. Mm-hmm. Why wait? What good would it? I knew what I wanted to do, and I saw the happiness train, the fulfillment train, this is what I was created for, this is what was poured into me, this is what God created me to be. It took me a long time, man, to come to the place where I realized God did indeed create me in part to be a parent, a step parent in this case, but a parent. And I seized it and, have never looked back, just as I've never looked back on my decision to follow Jesus from 1997.
In moving back, you didn't move back for a job, but you started your own business. Talk about that. Talk about your book, Bite the Dog.
Yeah.
The subtitle is Build a PR Strategy to Make News That Matters.
Yes. I started my own...
Because I guarantee you there are going to be listeners that are going to be, they like your story, they like where you've gone, they like some of the things that you've said, and they could use you, and they could use your services.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. So thank you for that, seriously. I decided I wanted to give it a go myself. To your point, I had made good relationships with reporters in both secular press and Christian press. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to start a business, maybe I can start it, and it's in public relations, so you don't have to be, it's not just about Hollywood. I can represent people all over the country doing all kinds of things. Not all of my clients are Christians. Not all of them are ministries, but some of them are. And I decided that I was going to put into practice for myself, because one of the things in Hollywood's all about, everything goes in 7-day cycles. It's all release. Everybody focuses on the release numbers and they move on to the next 7 days. And while it was rewarding to say, hey, we opened up the movie that we promoted the movie at the firm I worked for, faith-based firm I worked for in film marketing, The Man of Steel, one of the movies that we worked on. And people would ask me, well, why would a Christian firm work on a superhero movie? I'm like, Superman is a story of an otherworldly father who sends his only son to Earth to save mankind. I read that in a book somewhere, right? I mean, it's got Christ, metaphors all over the place. So all the things that I had learned in both journalism, what it's like being a reporter, what reporters look for, what interests them, how they want to give something fresh, new, exciting to their readers, listeners, viewers. What Sean Hannity told me, you've always brought me good guests. I wanted to bring good guests to people. Starting my own company was a way to do that. It didn't have to be solely in Hollywood, but I still do some work for Hollywood. So I launched Roar. The name came from a painting I saw that was painted during a worship service that I attended in Los Angeles. I bought that painting from the artist, the original. It hangs in my home office, of the lion roaring, just this epic roar that looks like it's blowing somebody's hair back. And that's the point that I want to make with my company, and that is sometimes you gotta speak loud enough your truth, your message, to blow the other guy's hair back a little bit. That's okay. So I founded Roar. That was 5 years ago, and I've beaten the odds. Right, new businesses fail in the first 3 years. I'm going on year 6, and we're doing better than we've ever done. And we have a client roster of a lot of different kinds of people, different types of people. It's and we're getting, we're helping them be heard. That's the motto for my brand promise: be heard. And that's what we're helping people accomplish. You have a message, articulate what's in their heart, to change hearts. That's what I want to help people do. That's what we've been able to help people do. And that comes from knowing what journalism is about, knowing what journalists look for, knowing how to speak to them, and then also knowing from a public relations perspective how to package something in the right way to attract attention, how to weather storms. Good grief, at Focus on the Family, we had a few storms, didn't we?
Oh, yeah.
We weathered some storms, but so I help clients do that. And having that experience, yes, as you indicated earlier, old journalist friends of mine say I crossed to the dark side because I went into public relations. Well, okay, I think what that allows me to do is I've seen how both sides of the bread are buttered, and I know how to speak to journalists, and I know what they're looking for, and I know what companies, speakers, authors, businesses, ministries, I know how to help them put their best rhetorical foot forward in getting attention for themselves. And that's what it is. Public relations is not rocket science, it's not dumb luck. It's simply leveraging expectations and opportunities in a way that capitalizes on what's going on in the media and what's going on in the marketplace of ideas to float all boats and get your message heard.
The website is weroar.la to learn more information. Gary, let's get to rapid fire questions.
Oh boy, I didn't know this was coming. Okay.
Hey everyone, before we get to the rapid fire segment, I wanted to talk about a way that you as a listener can support the show and the growth of Holy Smokes by becoming a monthly supporter at patreon.com/holysmokes. Patreon is a support platform, and for as little as $5 a month, you can get bonuses like ad-free versions of these podcast episodes, Holy Smoke swag like t-shirts, and more. That's patreon.com/holysmokes. We're looking to get 40 Patreon supporters at an average of $10 a month. And once we hit that, we'll be able to pay for all the costs for hosting, editing, writing, posting. I won't be paying for that out of my pocket or through the volunteering of my own personal time. And as we grow that number to 100 and 150, 200 patrons, we'll be able to do 2 shows a week, hire a part-time assistant and web developer, record on location and around the world, and more. I want to visit groups and get those stories from so many of you listeners that I hear from. I want to go to Seattle, and I want to go to Dallas, and I want to go to Charleston, South Carolina, and I want to go to Kentucky and Chicago and Phoenix, Atlanta, DC, Charlotte, back to Southern California, and more. We want to help grow your groups and plant new ones for those of you in areas without active groups. So, can you help us out? Become a regular supporter at patreon.com/holysmokes. There's a link in the show notes. That's patreon.com/holysmokes. Or if you want to make a one-time tax-deductible gift, go to paypal.me/holysmokesclub. That's paypal.me/holysmokesclub. And both of those links are in the show notes. Thanks.
Rapid fire. Fire. Here.
How's that stick treating you?
It's good. This is fabulous. As I told
A
you,
good celebratory stick.
as I told you before we were on air here, it's like smoking nothing, but smoking the greatest thing you've ever smoked. There's no after. I mean, it's just this relaxing. Yeah, which is kind of bad for a PR guy. You don't want to be relaxed too much. You want to be, I want to blow somebody's hair back, but I'm just like sitting back. So it's good.
When did you first try cigars or pipe?
First cigar I ever smoked. Well, okay. Are we counting the Swisher Sweets years in college?
That counted for me.
Okay, I mean
I counted that as really one my start, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean that was just trying to be cool, and that wasn't a big deal. But there was a guy actually at the paper in Wichita Falls who our smoking area was out. There was an abandoned railroad track behind the office. We would go outside and smoke cigarettes, and he would go out and he didn't smoke cigarettes, but he smoked cigars, and he gave me one night, and I was like, dang, that's kind of nice. And what I liked about it was the same thing I liked about playing softball in my 20s, is that there was an hour of softball, and then there was 4 hours of
Social time.
And a cigar, unlike a cigarette where you're just sucking it down in 10 minutes so you can go back to work and edit more copy, you can sort of sit down, you can unfurl the story as you and I have been doing here, as you and I have done privately many times. And that's what I liked about it, is that it was the end of the day and he had a cigar and we were out there smoking and the workday was done, the sun was going down, and we just shot the bowl for an hour, and it was fabulous. And that was my introduction to true cigar smoking. And it's been part of me ever since.
Have you ever done pipe?
No, I'm not.
Favorite cigar?
It's funny, you had offered one as a potential to me. It is, I'm going to pull it out here.
The Oliva.
Yeah, the Oliva Serie V is my favorite. What I loved about it is one of my clients got he won a box at a raffle, so he just gave me the box. I'm like, oh, great, because he smokes, but he had so many of them, he gave me a box of them. And it looks like it would be, I'm not and if I'm jumping ahead on questions, I apologize. I'm not a robust guy. I like them a little lighter, and it looks like it would be robust, but it's not that robust. It's a bit more mild, a bit more savory, and that's my go-to. And it's big. I mean, I talk with my hands, and there's something gloriously theatrical about being able to have a conversation and wave around a big 50-gauge cigar. So.
Most expensive cigar you've ever smoked?
Good question. I don't know what these go for. It probably would be some variety of a Cuban. It may be Cohiba. Again, one of the things I was telling you when you offered this one to me, I haven't smoked one of these since I got a box of them from a film producer in Hollywood. Some sort of Cuban is probably, I don't know which one it was, but it may indeed be this Cohiba. I don't know.
Best dollar for dollar cigar you've ever smoked?
That, and my brother is a big, big fan of this. And when he and I get together and smoke, he'll always pull this out. The Brick House Mighty Mighty.
Brick House.
The Brick House Mighty Mighty is like, single digit price tag, and it's a good draw, and it's a good long opportunity to unfurl some conversation.
Your go-to place to get smokes?
Cigars.com.
If you're celebrating, what's your splurge cigar?
I'm having it right now. I didn't have to splurge because you did. You gave it to me.
Favorite liquid pairing with your smoke?
Diet Mountain Dew. Being someone who is 24 years sober, I am not sober from caffeine. And while I didn't pick up coffee as a journalist, by golly, I picked up caffeine. So,
most interesting person you've ever met through cigars?
Most interesting person I've ever met through cigars. That's interesting, working at Hollywood. Probably would be the film producer I was talking about, Mark Burnett, who is the producer of Survivor, Shark Tank. He's the most successful reality TV producer of all time. When I was in Hollywood, I did work on a couple of things for him, one of which was the Bible miniseries that he and his wife, Roma Downey, put out. Roma paid me the greatest compliment, uncigar related. I wrote some speeches for her, and she said, "You write like an Irish angel," since she's Irish and she played Untouched by an Angel. But yeah, Mark and I enjoyed a cigar or two. So,
most memorable cigar experience?
That's easy. Alec Baldwin's Cigar Club in New York. Do you know Kevin McCullough?
Yeah.
And then you know of, if you don't know, Stephen Baldwin,
Yep.
Alec Baldwin's little brother. Well, so Kevin and Stephen Baldwin were radio partners, and I was in New York and I was visiting Kevin, and Kevin took me out to, for cigars, and he got us into, through Stephen, Alec Baldwin's this cigar. I don't even remember what it's called, but it's like this. I mean, there are so many fans in the ceiling of that place, Steve, that you can't even tell anybody smoking. And Al Sharpton was in the corner puffing on one. I mean, there was famous people all over the place, and they these women came out in mini skirts and lit your cigar with wood, and it was just a fabulous experience. To feel like, yeah, I could, like people who pay $50,000 a year or whatever to, be members of a Tony Cigar Club in Manhattan.
This is a question I've been looking forward to since I put it in the list.
Who's my favorite podcaster?
No.
Okay.
Marvel or DC? You're a big superhero guy.
Right. Marvel.
Why?
Marvel was my comic book moorings are Marvel, because comic books, Marvel was the comic book house that was real. They didn't have Metropolis and Gotham City. They had New York. Spider-Man lived in New York, and they had problems. They weren't, come on, Superman, they had to dream up kryptonite for him to have a problem. So the comic books of my youth, they were perhaps a little too serious. There were wisecracking superheroes in Marvel, from Spider-Man to The Thing in the Fantastic Four. Still upset they haven't made a good movie about that yet. Hopefully now that Marvel owns it, they'll be able to do it. All of that said, so Marvel for sure, I think what they've done with in the movies has been remarkable. Robert Downey Jr. As Iron Man was the key to starting all that off. They still bring humor to it, but it's not, goofy humor. That said, the stuff that Zack Snyder did with Man of Steel, his version of Justice League
that was so good
on HBO Max was excellent.
That was so good.
There's a place for both, and I think, depending on what kind of cigar do you want? Do you want something that's a little peppery, a little nutty? You want something that's a little bit more funny and humorous and bombastic? Marvel's your place to go. You want something that's a little bit more serious, a little bit more almost realistic. There was something realistic about. You believed Batman could really be Batman in some of the stuff that DC's done with Christian Bale and then with Affleck that Snyder did. So the answer to that question is both.
Favorite superhero?
Favorite superhero?
You had to choose one.
If I had to choose one. Favorite superhero will always be Superman, because of the 1978 movie with Christopher Reeve. The slogan for that poster was, "You will believe a man can fly." I was 12, 13 years old, and I saw that movie with 1978 special effects, and I believed a man could fly. It was fantastic. I still watch it at least once a year.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
And here's where people turn the podcast off. I'm not a big fan of either.
Okay.
If I had to pick one, Star Wars was big when I was, again, 12. I saw them all, didn't love them that much. I wasn't a huge Star Trek guy. The reboots of Star Trek, I've liked okay. So if you're going to force me, I'd say Star Trek.
Dogs, cats, neither, or both?
Huge cat guy, and now my stepdaughter has a dog who's come to live with us for the last year and a half, and I don't know that we would have gotten through as well as we did last year of COVID without that dog. And she's nutty, she's not a big cuddler, she's not any of those things, but there's just something about her infectious enthusiasm. And during the day when Kelly and I are working, Kelly's still working from home, if I'm working from home, we'll get up and talk to each other at some point. The dog will come out of the bedroom where it sleeps because Alyssa, my stepdaughter, is at work. Dog's bored, dog's sleeping, she hears voices. Out of the room she comes with a tennis ball in her mouth going, will someone bounce this for me? So there's something about, having a dog. I'm surprised that my heart leaps at dogs now.
Favorite 1 to 3 books not titled the Holy Bible?
Well, darn it, I was going to give you 3 different translations I like. The favorite book I've read in recent years, and I tend to be an of-the-moment favorite book guy, so the favorite one I've read in the last few years is a Babe Ruth biography called The Big Fella by Jane Levy. And what it does is it recounts in the late 20s how Ruth and Lou Gehrig barnstormed the country playing exhibition games. And what I liked about it, in addition to just being a baseball fan, and there's great nuggets in there, is it talks about how Ruth's manager who set these games up was kind of the father of modern day public relations, and that he built hype around these things. He made, talking about what makes good public relations, leveraging expectations and opportunities for Babe Ruth to be in, Hoboken, and he's playing baseball at some, somebody's park, and he's talking to people and interacting with fans. It was fascinating how he made far more money that summer or that fall doing that than he ever made per season playing baseball. So that's up there in my current state. I'm reading right now, it's exhaustive, a Churchill biography called Walking with Destiny by Andrew Morton. And it's like 1,200 pages. So it's like, I'm not even to World War II yet. So I keep stopping and putting it down so I can, like it's not the kind of book you bring on a plane. So when I flew here, it's like, I just brought some pulpy novel with me for that. But that is an excellent, really great insights into Churchill's character, especially his relationship with his parents and how that shaped him and how he overcame some pretty traumatic things that would have, what he overcame in his childhood with the kind of, one might say, mental illness of his dad, and his mom was distant, explains exactly. I can't wait to read about the World War II years because it shows how he could have persevered through that. And then, of course, my all-time favorite book of the moment is Bite the Dog. My book on my manifesto on public relations. Build a PR strategy to make news that matters. Available where all good books are sold, and even some not so good books. And soon there will be perhaps even more of a favorite of mine, a book I co-wrote with my best friend since college on the films of Frank Sinatra, called Frank Sinatra on the Big Screen. The singer as actor and filmmaker is coming out from McFarland Publishers by me and my friend James L. Nyber. And it's a film-by-film analysis of Frank Sinatra as a actor and producer. And it's a fascinating story because he comes out of being the voice, the singer, right? He's in his first movie roles, he's the boy singer in musical interludes in films. And he's this naive waif, and he gets typecast, and he wants so hard to break out of it. So he gets the role when his career's at the absolute nadir. And he gets the role in From Here to Eternity, he wins an Oscar. And then boom, he's in demand. And for the next 10 years in the 50s, from about 53 to 61, drama, comedy, musical, untouchable. Pal Joey, his best movie in my estimation, where he just plays this ne'er-do-well singer, and he's in such command of the screen. And then, after he does all that, and he gets typecast by Hollywood, wants to breaks out, and then goes, okay, I proved my point. 7 of his last 8 roles were as either world-weary private eyes or cops. He just played one-note characters. He was good, but it wasn't anything great. Fascinating career trajectory of a guy who wanted to break free from typecasting, did, and then just didn't care anymore, really, after he proved his point. Love that about him. That comes out this fall from McFarland. And
you guys have some other some other books about films in the works.
We've got contracts for, so like, as Jim and I, we'll chat. It'll be like, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we did? And it's hard to do because he's written 30 books. The Bond book will be his 29th or 30th. And, he's got silent film comedians and silent film guys and Clark Gable, and he just did one on Judy Garland, and he's just got all this. But for people who are still alive, hard to do because you can't do like a synopsis of here's their whole career. So the Bond movies is our next one that we're going to do, and the James Bond films. That one there's a good stopping point because this is Daniel Craig's last one, No Time to Die, and then it'll go on, but it'll be different. So that's from Sean. So it's our working title is the James Bond films from Connery to Craig. That we're going to start writing here in the next couple of months, and then we've got contracts for the good Burt Reynolds movies, not those straight-to-video ones, which is he's a.
Is that going to be the title of the book, the good Burt Reynolds films?
It's like the essential Burt Reynolds or something like that. And then we're going to do, because Robert Redford's announced his retirement, we're going to do a film-by-film study of Robert Redford's movies too. So what my friend James L. Nyber, the author, has really pioneered this kind of format where he does deep dives film by film from Jerry Lewis. He's still, to this day, Jim is the world's foremost authority on Jerry Lewis's movies. He gets asked to do DVD extra commentaries all the time on not just Lewis, but on a bunch of sort of classic Hollywood both types and tropes. So that's going to be fun to kind of go through, as it was with Sinatra, to go through Bond, the good Burt, and all of Redford. And just to put a bow on the package of this whole conversation we've had, the Sinatra book, I don't even know if you know this, the Sinatra book was an idea I had because he wrote his first book when we were in college. And I had the idea in the early 90s to do this book, and I got a contract for it from the publisher, McFarland, who's publishing the book in the next couple of months. And because of where I was in my life, right? Mm-hmm. Drunk, just not capable of doing it. I just didn't finish it. I just didn't do it. It languished for more than 20 years. And when I moved back home, he's like, you know what, let's revisit that. I bet I can get that published. He called his publisher. They bought the idea in a heartbeat. And now, 20-some years in the making, that book will be out in the next couple of months, which is an awesome, again,
that's cool.
That is part of what I believe God created me to be.
Full circle.
Right, and that's another example of that.
If you could live anywhere, where would that be?
I'm living it. I'm back home. Thomas Wolfe was wrong. You can't go home again.
What's your greatest strength? And what's your greatest weakness?
Greatest weakness is my, interesting how I went to weakness first. Answer the toughest question first. Good PR strategy. My greatest weakness is overly emotional, can be fatalistic, as evidenced by the Bucks, the season's over. That's the sort of funny way it shows up. God did a lot of things when I got saved. Took away alcoholism like that. Mm-hmm. Gone. Mm-hmm. Never do I feel like I want to drink. There are days I remember why I drank, but I never want to have one. I could have one, in fact, because I don't call myself, I believe God cured me of alcoholism. I could, if I ever liked the taste of alcohol, I was never a burger and beer guy, so I could do that, but just why bother? I don't want to do it. So my greatest strength, I think my greatest strength is that I know the zip code of my weaknesses. I know where they lie. I know where they fall. I know where my blind spots aren't all that blind to me anymore. So I don't have them mastered. I still fall prey to them, right? We all sin. All have fallen short. I still fall short, but I kind of know where they're grouped. And I was just having a conversation on a podcast I co-host with just yesterday. I did it before I left. And we were talking about like bosses who are jerks and how to give feedback to people in a way that you're not a jerk. And I thought about, for the last, at some point, I stopped wanting evaluations of my work and of me to be about everything I do right, because I kind of know what I do right. Tell me the things that I'm not doing right. Tell me how I can get better. Don't, and then don't just point them out. Don't just say you do this wrong, but point out, maybe you'd want to, Kelly's great, for me in that regard. So I think my greatest strength is knowing the zip code of my weaknesses. I may not get the city right and put the pin in the right spot in the map all the time, but I know how to get the mail there.
Who's the first person you think of when you hear the word successful?
My dad.
Why?
He lived a long life that got better till the end. He worked on relationships till the end. I talked about how he knew how to forgive people. He knew how to ask for forgiveness and give forgiveness. My brother and I went to see him in January of last year before the pandemic, and my brother had a bad moment. He can also be a little fatalistic sometimes, and he had some words with my dad, and he felt really bad about it. And they were alone together in the house, and my brother apologized to my dad. He said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. Sometimes I just say the wrong thing, and I get so angry, and my dad laughed and said, "Stand in line. It's been the story of my life." He was working on that till the day he died.
He had the biggest smile.
He did.
He had just the most vibrant, bright, light up the room smile.
Yeah. For his eulogy, which I gave as we're recording this less than a week ago, I did 93 things I wanted people to know about my dad since he died at 93. And one of them was, and that was one of the, I did funny things like he liked rye toast, things that were stupid. And then I did serious things. And one of the serious things, because I wanted to break up the moments I might cry. And when I said this, I cried. And that was exactly what you said. His smile, it could light up a room the way a floodlight could light up a closet. That was my dad. And he was successful because he raised 5 kids. He didn't raise them perfectly, but he raised his youngest to know the zip code of his weaknesses, because he knew the zip code of his weaknesses.
Final 3 questions. What does Holy Smokes mean to you, and how has it contributed to your spiritual journey?
It is a great, going back to what we talked about earlier about the idea of being able to unwind over a cigar and talk about things that matter. It's hard in life day to day with work. It's harder now in the pandemic, and I don't know how it's going to come back as life gets back to what normal was. When you, at work especially, there were so many serendipitous moments that came up as you just would bump into people. You and I experienced them when we worked at Focus. You'd bump in the hallway, we'd have a chat, and you'd be able to share about life. And it's harder to do now when life is so much Zoom meetings that start at a certain time, and you talk over each other, and it's like everybody's on satellite delay, and it's weird. So I love the fact that there's room for conversation. This is what I love about the podcast format. There's no, we got to go to commercial. So you can have a conversation that goes in different directions so that you can get all the oxygen out of you to tell the story. But also, the other thing I love about it, Steve, is that, to be with people that don't make you feel like it's sinful to smoke a cigar or to have a drink. Now, one thing I haven't said, I'm sober 24 years, but I don't think alcohol is demon hooch, right? I don't think, I had no talent for social drinking. If I did, I would do it. I had no talent for it. Many people do, and that's great. I love it. I still love being in bars. I still love being in that kind of environment. So I think what Holy Smokes does is it allows Christians to come to a place, non-judgmental, where they can talk about the things that they enjoy while doing the things that they enjoy.
Yeah.
It doesn't get much better than that.
If you could have a Holy Smoke with any 3 people throughout history, living or deceased, who would they be? Can't name Jesus.
Well, dang it, I was going to say Jesus. Any 3 people, living or deceased, and they have to be real. They can't be superheroes, right?
No, they could be.
No.
There have been people that have given fictitious characters from books that they've loved, or.
No, I would want to. I don't remember my grandfather, my dad's dad. he was a cigar smoker. My brother has his ashtray. So I would love to know my grandfather, because I didn't know my grandfather. So there's one. Two would be the first favorite baseball player I ever had. Guy in the Cubs, an outfielder for the Cubs, still alive, named Billy Williams. I fell in love with baseball watching him play baseball. Ernie Banks was just a little bit before he was still there, but he was on the way out. Billy Williams was ascending at that point. And then you said I couldn't name Jesus, but you didn't say I couldn't name anybody else in the Bible. So I would say Moses.
Why?
I would pick Moses because I have a lot in common with him. Moses had a bit of a temper.
Yeah.
I have often looked to him when he was asked to call water out of the rock. Instead of calling it out, he smacked it with his staff. And that was it for him. And he had moments where he had lost his temper, and God forgave and forgave and forgave, and there were no consequences per se. And that one was consequences. No promised land. And I wonder, I've used that in my life as my own temper will rise. I don't know what the number is, but is there a number that it pushes it too far, and I've gone too far? Not that God can't forgive anything, but there are consequences that I'm not expecting. That God forgives, he does, and often that forgiveness comes without consequences that hurt too much. But sometimes there are consequences that hurt relationships and do those kinds of. So I'd love to talk to Moses about just the way that he lived. What was it like going from not even having your own cattle? You're tending the cattle of your father-in-law, right? The herds of your father-in-law. And you go from that to, being the father of a nation. That must have been a wonderful journey. And I think Moses has probably had this kind of conversation that we've just had, to sit down over a cigar and have that kind of conversation about Moses' inner life. That would be fascinating to me. I'd love that. I'd learn a lot. And hopefully I'd be able to apply those lessons to my own life.
Final question. If we're to meet 1 year from today, and I got a bottle of Diet Mountain Dew and another great stick, what are we celebrating?
I hope a year from today, we're celebrating you, Steve, being in, if not married, being in a fulfilling, mutually beneficial relationship in which you and your boys form that complete family again. Because I would love to look into those eyes with that happiness in them again. Not that there's not happiness in them now, but I would love to look there and hear those stories from you.
I love you, my man. Thank you.
I love you too.
Gary Schneeberger, thanks for being on the Holy Smokes podcast. Love you, brother.
Love you too. Thanks for having me.